You took notes on what you had to do to get the piece of the pie that belonged to you. You've been waiting for this ever since you were young. Be careful not to choke on your tongue. Get famous. So obviously, this song this week is Get Famous from the 2020 album Getting Into Knives. Now, Getting Into Knives hit at a really strange point in time for pretty much the world, right? This was some months after lockdown had happened. No one really knew the album was going to be coming out. The previous release had been Songs for Pierre Chauvin, which was a throwback album to John just recording on a boombox to try and raise money to help support the band and his entire team, because they were going to go on tour and those plans had to be scuttled because of the pandemic. So Getting Into Knives is recorded in a studio in the South somewhere. I can't exactly remember, but it was recorded pretty quickly. And right after that, they literally left there and went to Muscle Beach to record the next album, Getting Dark in Here. So they were working essentially on 2 albums at the same time. And the whole of Getting Into Knives it's a departure from the previous studio album, which is In League with Dragons, which is a reflection on age and aging and so forth. And the songs on Getting Into Knives don't have that same kind of sort of thematic thread that connects all of them. It's an album of just really solid songs, and all of them tell very different stories. Get Famous is a pretty straightforward, track in terms of like symbolism and metaphor. It is literally what it says on the tin. John is talking to some metaphorical you, some unnamed person who has wanted the spotlight their entire lives, right? But the song very much acknowledges and looks at the darkness that comes with getting that kind of the fame. Light up the sky like a comet, make yourself want to vomit, shine like a cursed star, show everybody exactly who you are, right? That's a stanza from near the end of the song. And there's a lot in there. Now, obviously, we know that capitalism basically makes producing art of any kind, be it music or, say, a video podcast, a challenging prospect, especially if you want to make a career out of it. You have to be a combination of really good and really lucky. And if you're extremely good and extremely lucky, then you get to stick to your principles. And I think that, the Mountain Goats and John in particular is an example of what can happen when someone who is just really exceptionally good at their craft and who will not stop just does what they do. He has a very intentional approach to his songwriting. He writes a lot. He is extremely prolific. It is what he has trained the machinery of his brain to do. Or maybe it's just how the machinery of his brain works. But John, self-stated in the podcast I Only Listen to the Mountain Goats, is a fan of work. He believes work is inherently good, especially when decoupled from capital. And I think that this song is kind of a reflection of some of that, because we have all seen stories of people who have gotten their fame and their fortune and have been absolutely destroyed by it. And that song is sort of, it talks about that duality, right? Like how there's a desire, like, yeah, go ahead, get famous. I want to see what you can do. But also, hey, you really do need to be careful, because there are pitfalls and there are traps laying all around down that road. The work that I've done in the past has been creative work, tabletop role-playing game design. And for a long time, I harbored this thought that I was just going to shake that industry, that I was going to do work that set everyone on fire. And that's not me. That's never been who I am. I'm only, just now in the last few years becoming comfortable with that. And I'm leaning into things that are much more me. I'm never going to get famous, I don't think. But what I am going to do is I am going to try and find a path that works for me to be able to continue to make the kinds of things I want to make, much like this podcast. So with that in mind, the deck that I made today is leaning into the themes that are exactly the opposite of that. So let's transition over and take a look at what we have going on here. So the deck that I made is helmed by Greasefang, Okiba Boss. Greasefang is a card that has seen a lot of play in competitive EDH as of late. It can be an extremely powerful card, especially if you really take advantage of some of his abilities. But basically, what he can do is at the beginning of combat on your turn, return target vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of your next end step. So you get to pull big old vehicles, maybe with powerful ETBs or other effects from your graveyard to the battlefield. They're immediately able to be crewed and attacked with, and then they come back to your hand, so you can cast them again or find a way to discard them. So what I did, the framework for all of this, for this deck, is that Greasefang, our friend right here, has decided to get famous. And there are lots of different kinds of fame, right? You can be a movie star. You can be a musician. You can be in a band, right? You could be a political figure. Greasefang has decided to put on a stunt show, and it's a stunt show filled with wacky, over-the-top vehicles and a lot of really, really underhanded and vile sort of practices. This is a fantasy, horrific kind of... has very Rakdos vibes to it in my mind, even though Greasefang is Orzhov colors. But basically, I have divided, as you hit the Moxfield link in the description there, you can see that I've divided this deck into some categories, much like I did the previous one. So, as usual, we have our mana pile sitting over here, 6 artifacts that just generate mana just to get the deck moving. And you'll see that I have my lands separated out here, and normally I don't talk about the mana base as its own sort of thing, because the mana base, I just want to sort of be consistent for each of these decks, but they go into a special category for this one. So we'll start off with the first category up here, which these are the stunt vehicles, right? These are the vehicles that I picked to be in the deck that are part of Greasefang's wild stunt show. So we've got a getaway car, if I can get it to focus. Getaway. There we go. Getaway car. 4/3 crew 1 with haste. We have Surge Hacker Mech. We've got Mukotai Soul Ripper. You can see that these vehicles are not fantastic necessarily. High Speed Hoverbike. That sounds stunt worthy. Thundersteel Colossus. Great stunt vehicle. Why not? Dragonfly Suit. Again, and a lot of these you'll see are from Neon Dynasty, because Neon Dynasty introduced a lot of really neat vehicles. We have Starscream Power Hungry, because why, if you're going to have a stunt show, why not have a sentient vehicle that can crew itself? So Starscream can come in as a vehicle that has living metal and doesn't need anyone to crew it. So that's extremely cool. So even if it dies, you can bring Starscream back right away. The Golden Argosy, so you can flicker things that you've used to crew it. The Smuggler's Buggy, Ghost Arc, and a lot of the stuff that you'll see in this deck comes from the 40k commander decks, because the Necron deck was full of vehicles. So Necron Monolith, again, this is a wild stunt show, y'all. Thunderhawk Gunship is extremely, extremely cool. Reaver Titan, Knight Paladin, and of course, if you're going to do a vehicle deck, you have to put it in the Mech Titan core, because who doesn't want to summon a giant mecha? Now, there are vehicles in Magic that are absolutely massive, like Parhelion 2, right? Big, massive ships. I have said before that I make these decks based on the cards that I have, and I am willing to go out and pick up a card or two if I think it's really worth it. I did not go and get the Parhelion 2 or the other big flying vehicle that I can't remember off the top of my head. I did try to get a copy of Clown Car from Infinity, because it would have been hilarious, and also it would have fit into the other theme of this deck, which you're going to see when we get to the drivers. Now, the way that I went with this isn't just vehicle recursion. I also went with a go-wide token creation strategy, so I could make sure that I always had bodies to crew the vehicles that got summoned or got pulled from the graveyard. So my drivers, much like the wrestling deck last time, these are our legendary creatures. So we have Ellen Harbreeze, Busybody. You get to take a look at cards based on the number of tokens that you've created. We have Drana, Liberator of Malakir. Add bonuses to all your creatures. Imhotep the Stormlord. You get to make Necron artifact warriors or warrior artifact creature tokens when artifacts leave your graveyard, which is exactly what Greasefang does. Ellis Ilkor, we've got creatures entering and leaving triggers for him. We have Gisa Glorious Resurrector, so you can make tokens out of your opponent's stuff. We have Felice, Reverent Medium. There is literally no creature I can think of that is better at making tokens than her. Benny Brax, Zoologist. Convoke, and if you created tokens, you draw a card. Lysa, Forgotten Archangel. I was debating between putting Lysa or putting... Oh, shoot. What's the other one that I was going to put in here that does a similar thing? Right. Radodrobic of Urborg. Because Radodrobic says when your legendary creatures leave the battlefield, they come back as zombie tokens, which I thought was a really cool way to reuse these drivers. Say they got into an accident. Well, then, of course, Greasefang just resurrects them. But Lysa actually recycles them back to your hand, so you get the full creature again, which I thought was a more powerful effect, or at least the effect that I wanted. King Makar, the Gold Cursed. Fantastic vehicle card because you create gold every time you untap him, and you can use him to crew vehicles, so he's always going to be tapped and you can always generate gold off of him. And then Adelaine, Resplendent Cathar, because, oh my gosh, fantastic way to make tokens. So those are all of our stunt drivers. Next, we have the crew, who are sort of running things behind the scenes, and this is where you start getting a look at how the show would actually go off. So, Grim Hireling is making treasure tokens when your creatures die. Solemn Recruit. We've got Defiler of Faith. This is a hell of a show. Mardu Strike Leader, more token creation. Body Launderer. You get to connive and filter through your deck with him, and then also recur stuff from your graveyard. Shakedown Heavy. You have to have someone shaking down the audience when you've got a show like this. Zephyrim, which you can cast multiple times with Squad, and you get a bunch of Zephyrim tokens. Deep Gnome Terramancer, so you have some land drawing. Wandering Archaic, because I just thought it was neat to copy opponents' instants and sorceries, so why not? And Hotshot Mechanic, because how on flavor is that? Then we have the workshop, where all of this stuff is getting put together. So Sculpting Steel can come in as a copy of any artifact you have on board. Deployed to the front. Tokens to come out from the workshop. Foundry Inspector, so your artifacts are cheaper. Scrap Trawler, so you have more graveyard recursion. Mystic Forge, so you can cast artifacts from the top of your library. Precursor Golem makes some extra stuff, and you can copy your instant sorceries to target your other golems. Repair and Recharge is perfectly on theme, and so is Argivian Find. So that's the workshop. And then the show itself is sort of where some of this other stuff comes in. So Rogue's Passage, though a land, I have in here because it's sort of how you get creatures into the show. Despark, this is a very destructive show. Mortify, Okaiba Reckoner Raid, Utter End, Dark Ritual, Cut Down, Hero's Downfall, Rite of Oblivion, Vindicate, lots of removal, Inspiring Leader, because that's what Greasefang is or aspires to be. Launch the Fleet, so you get a bunch of tokens. Defenders of Humanity, again, more token creation. Mana Tithe, come on, pay for your ticket. And then one of my all-time favorite cards, we'll highlight Call of Coppercoats again real quick at the end here, because you get to make, again, a bunch of tokens. But Rabble Rousing is one of my favorite new cards from New Capenna. So Hideaway 5, you cast it, you look at the top 5 cards of your library, choose one to exile underneath this, and whenever you attack with one or more creatures, you create that many 1/1 green and white citizen creature tokens. And Rabble Rousing then checks to see if you have 10 creatures, and if you do, you cast the hidden card for free. Rabble Rousing then sticks around and just keeps making citizens every time you attack. So if you're going wider and wider and wider, you've got these vehicles getting crewed and going over the top or smashing through. I think it's a really fun sounding strategy. And then lastly, I broke out these lands because these lands, the non-basic ones, they are the venues where these shows happen. So there's a show at the Forsaken Sanctuary, there's a show at the Command Tower, there's a show at the Myriad Landscape, there's a show at the Orzhov Basilica. You get the idea, right? Part of this is just positioning on my part when I play the deck, right? Because I can say, oh, hey, there's a show at the Scoured Barrens today when I cast it. It's just keeping things on flavor for this being like this big grisly spectacle. So those are all that. And then lastly, I have the swamps and the plains just sort of broken out here because this is the show traveling along the road from venue to venue, through the swamps, through the plains. It's cheesy. Absolutely, it's cheesy. And I absolutely love it. So the deck is, I think, going to be a lot of fun to play. It's going to generate a lot of tokens. And even if you're not able to get the vehicle thing to work, you've got the tokens as a backup, and you're just going to overwhelm with that kind of thing. So that is Greasefang and Get Famous, because he is going to be absolutely lighting up the sky like a comet when you have a chance to play this deck. As I'm wrapping this episode up, a couple cool things to shout out. The podcast got mentioned in Boing Boing last week, which was wild. I never expected that to happen. So that's really cool. And the next episode is going to be something different for this. This is obviously a podcast that is based on Commander and Commander decks because those are very easy to theme. However, when John Darnielle saw this project when I launched the first episode, he asked, nay, demanded that I make a standard deck. And so I have been working on that. Standard is a very different format from Commander, and what it asks a deck to do is a very different set of things. But next week, we are going to premiere the standard deck built on theme based on a Mountain Goat song that I made for John Darnielle. He doesn't know about it yet. He's going to find out about it as soon as I release the episode, just like everybody else. But I think that is extremely cool, and I am extremely excited to show everyone what's going on. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching. I really, really greatly appreciate it. You can head over and support me on Patreon at patreon.com/theothertracy. You get the videos early. You get Discord access, so you can talk about this or any of the other work that I've done. If you like this, obviously do the thing, click like, click subscribe, leave some comments. I just really, really appreciate it. And if you're listening to the audio version of this, go ahead and leave a review wherever you are getting this. I really, really appreciate it. So that has been the Mountain Goats meets Magic the Gathering for this week. And next week, we will see a standard deck. Neat change of pace. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.